The views and opinions expressed are that of the individuals and are not the reflections of any Grand Masonic body. The goal in this video series is to enlighten the minds of our viewers with Masonic education for the modern Freemason, wherever they might be. Take due notice thereof and govern yourselves accordingly. This is Modern Working Tools, today's tools for the modern Freemason. I am your host, Brother Justice, broadcasting live from Barrington 522 in Barrington, Illinois. Noteworthy to highlight him in our Masonic profiles. He's an illustrious brother, 33 with the Scottish Rite. He is also a member of lodges in Japan as well as Massachusetts. It is an honor to have him. So I would like to give a Masonic profile about Brother Christopher Earnshaw and a little bit of background into his story and what keeps him going. I feel that his story is very inspiring. So I would like to have him on here tonight. I am very honored to present this to you. So, Brother Chris, enough with the long-winded intros. If you could just elaborate to us a little bit about your backstory, how you got involved with the fraternity, your current roles and position right now over in Japan. I know there's a time delay, so it is an honor to have you this morning over there in Japan. I think your story could definitely inspire other Freemasons who are interested in the deeper meanings, the allegories, the symbolism, and also historians as well, Brother Masons who are looking to, be lodge historian, lodge education officer, preserve documents. A lot of brethren out there are interested in this, but they don't have positive influences or mentors to guide them in that role. They're sort of left to do it on their own. So if you could just give us a little background about yourself and your position and what inspires you to do what you do.
But to start with, very simply, my background is my father, grandfather, and also great-grandfather were all Masons. I think my closest connection was actually to my grandfather, but he never talked much about it. He just disappeared every Thursday evening, but he had a good time and he had some very good friends. I mentioned in one of my books, my grandfather came to stay at my house because he was feeling poorly. And one evening, the Speaker of the House of Commons, which probably in America would be Nancy Pelosi or some equivalent, turned up on our doorstep. And I opened the door. I was like 15. I'd seen the speaker on television. I thought, what's he doing here? And he'd come to see my grandfather because they were both in the same lodge. And that had a very strong impression on me that, my grandfather, he didn't have such an illustrious career himself, but somebody who was famous on the world stage would make the effort to come to see my grandfather. That was not just moving, but it kind of hit me deeply. So many years later, I moved to Japan. Sorry, I'm a little bit asthmatic. I get cough sometimes. I moved to Japan with my work. I was working in pharmaceuticals, and I joined a social club and sports club, and in the car park there was a Masonic lodge, and that reminded me that I had thought about joining the craft. And I talked to some people, got an introduction, and joined Rising Sun Lodge 1601 in Kobe, Japan. So that's basically my simple background. I've been a Mason for now 38 years. And it was only when it was like more than that, probably the 25th year, I was kind of planing on a plateau. Masonry there are very many facets to Masonry, which I find interesting, and I try and tell people this. One part we are a international charity. Secondly, we're a fraternity. We look after each other. We're also a theatre and a debating society. And we also have a spiritual aspect. We pray to God, and we have the Bible in front of us all the time. And of course, on top of this, there's the moral education. And so um, I was at that time probably, yes, I think the ritual had become a little bit dead to me. But then I started questioning things, and this was really the start of my journey, and for me to write my books and make my videos on YouTube. I was finding things in the ritual that I kind of glossed over for so many years. And then I looked at it in more detail. I said, there's something strange here. And it's to do with Pythagoras uh, shouting out Eureka. I don't know if this is a mixed audience, so I can't go into details. But uh, Pythagoras didn't shout Eureka. It was Archimedes. And any child, and my education is what we call a classical education. In England, it doesn't really exist much. I went to a private rather than a state school. And in private schools, they still teach Latin and Greek. And they also teach handwriting, how to write nicely, and they teach things like rhetoric and debate. This is what we now call a classical education, but in the old days, they would have studied the Greek authors and Latin authors, and they would have known in the 1700s that Pythagoras did not say Eureka. So why is it still in the ritual? It's a mistake, and it hasn't been changed, and it probably hasn't been changed on purpose, because it is there to make you think, well, there must be more to this than just a mistaken word. It had to be there on purpose. So then I started looking at other aspects, and then I came to realize that there were many hints hidden in the ritual that suggested alchemy. Well, this is just the time um, when the Royal Society had been set up in 1660 or 1661, depending how you measure it. And in the 1717s, at the beginning of the Premier Grand Lodge, which later became the Grand Lodge of England, um, the sciences were taking over, and alchemy and all these medieval things like the four humors and other things, they were being kind of discredited. And this is just the time when that crossover was happening. And one of the major players in this crossover was actually Isaac Newton. And we now know that Isaac Newton wrote prodigiously about all sorts of scientific matters, but something like 20% of all his writing was on alchemy. So he was an alchemist until his death, which is about 1727, I believe. So 10 years after the founding of Freemasonry, there were still people in England practicing alchemy. Another was Robert Boyle, a leading scientist, an Irishman. I think he was actually the son of the Lord of Cork from Ireland. So there was still some people studying alchemy, and I believe that they used Freemasonry to teach an alchemical lesson. So Newton was not known to be an alchemist, a Freemason, and by all accounts, he said he was not a clubbable man. He didn't join things as such. So his secretary was John de Sagulier, and one of the first three Grand Masters. He also was the master of the mint, where they make the coinage. And in those days, there was still no paper notes. It was all coinage. In the next room was the treasury, and the director of the treasury was George Payne. another grandmaster. So you have two grandmasters who knew Isaac Newton extremely well. So I feel that he guided them. There's a third point. Why would somebody working like George Payne, who was an antiquarian, he collected old documents about England's glorious past, um, what would he know about alchemy? That in those days, alchemy was a practical science. You did it. You didn't. It wasn't an internal science. It was a practical thing. You would mix mercury and sulfur and other things and try and transmute lead to gold, or other experiments. And so neither George Payne nor John de Saguglia have this in their background when you look at them. So they had no understanding. Somebody had to teach them. And as they worked closely with Isaac Newton, I believe Isaac Newton told them what to put into the rituals.
Mm.
Because when they met in 1716 at the Apple Tree Lodge in London, in Covent Garden, and they met with all the other operative Masons, I'm not sure how many there were there, probably 20, 25, and decided to set up a new Grand Lodge. The first thing they decided to do is to rewrite all the rituals. And we can see this by looking at all what was existed before 1716 and what happened, what was written after 1716. And we can see the change. And the content has become very different. And secondly, in 1725, they introduced a third degree, which didn't exist before. Previously, it was a 1 or at best 2-degree ritual. I think it's mainly a 1-degree ritual. We know from the what is called the Edinburgh Registry Office manuscript. I think that's the correct word. Oh, sorry, Edinburgh Registry House manuscript. Basically, what this is, the registry house in Edinburgh was where people went to register births and deaths and property deals, registering property boundaries and things like that. And a manuscript was found there, and it turned out to be one of the most complete exposés of operative ritual. So based on that, which is a 1-degree ritual, we can see there's a complete change after 1717. So that's how I got involved in writing my books. My books are called Spiritual Freemasonry. There are 4 of them. And then to go to, I think, your third question in the case you which I unpacked, it's about about education in lodges, and I'm now preparing a 5th book for education in lodges, and it's going to be a lot of quizzes which you can use for example, in harmony. You can use them to raffle things. You can have prizes like a bottle of scotch, and the person who gets most answers, everybody has to pay £1. And this way you both raise money for the lodge, and secondly, get people involved and people win prizes. Secondly, they're going to be shorter questions for people who want to write articles and on blogs or internet, or just lots of titles and suggestions about what they might want to look at. And lastly, they're going to be more in-depth questions for people who want to either send research to the Ars Quarnoculturi, AQR, I can never pronounce it, sorry, AQC. So if you want to send in research to some of the Freemason research organizations, you want to have something in depth with a lot of references. And I'm going to also give several ideas for this. I'm just off the top of my head, for example, we don't know much about George Payne. We don't have a picture of him, we have a picture of de Saguglia. We know very well about him, his early life, and living in Guernsey with his father, etc. But we don't know much about George Payne or Anthony Sayre, for example. Anthony Sayre, we don't know what he did. We have two pictures of him, but that's about it. What else? There must be more. And so I give ideas how you can research this. And you probably have to be based in England, though. You need to go to church registries, various registry offices, for example, organizations. Some people believe that Anthony Sayre was a solicitor, a lawyer, and so he would have had to have an apprenticeship that would have been recorded somewhere. So this footwork probably have to be done in England. But there are a lot of other things that can be researched. And so research is a kind of passion for me now. So finding that small mistake about Pythagoras in the ritual started me off in a completely new, on a tangent in a different direction. And I'm having great fun. If that answers your question, I don't know.
It does. There's a lot of Easter eggs in our ritual. And the more you peel back the layers of the onion, you find more information. We'll definitely be covering a lot of these Easter eggs in our show, with future subsequent episodes to come.
Right.
And it's an honor to have you here. You're a wealth of knowledge. I really enjoy spiritual Freemasonry. I'm about halfway done with the first volume, and thus far I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of information, but it's not delivered in a way that's just going to overload you. It's in a sizable, digestible way. Your bibliography is crazy. Just even looking at that, it just like blows my mind apart. But I'm really interested about your story.
Yes, so I'm preparing a book for lodge education, as I mentioned, and so I have so many other. I also teach at university, and I have responsibilities there, and so I'm really a little bit busy at the moment. But hopefully by the year end, I should have. Year end being December 2021, I should have the book complete.
Awesome. Looking forward to checking that out.
So it'll be lots of questions and answers, small things that people should know. For example, like I was horrified. I met a Grand Master of a certain Grand Lodge, and we were outside in Tokyo, and he pointed, we have a lot of high-rise building. He pointed at the high-rise building and said, how proud he felt that, the Masons were building, Freemasons were building these type of buildings for the last 300 years. And I said, Freemasons don't build buildings, I just I can't believe, that we're speculative Freemasons, not operative Freemasons. And a Grand Master didn't understand the difference. And that to me was horrendous, how somebody like that can become Grand Master. It was just, I don't know. And that's a problem with Masonry at the present. The understanding of things like, not just the Constitution and bylaws, but our history. People don't bother to read, and that is to me really sad. I think that's a weakness about Freemasonry at the current time.
Well, that's why we at Martin Working Tools, we want to make an effort to spread light out there for maybe misinformed brethren. I know in the days past of Freemasonry, it was looked at more like a social club. But the origins of Freemasonry in the colonies were not the case. There were more men who were philosophically inclined. They had discussions on religion and politics, things that we don't normally discuss in lodges today. They were talking about them. And usually it was over a drink as well. They were having a great time, and these men were of the gentry class, and they had a certain respect for the mysticism and the allegory allegory behind Freemasonry. And as Freemasonry expanded westward into the Western territories, you see a lot of instances where early Grand Masters had checkered pasts, and they were starting Grand Lodges, to better their business goals and better their political standing. So you see a lot of that in the Western frontier. I'm currently working on a lecture about a similar issue here in Grand Lodge, Illinois. During the second formation after the Morgan Affair and the Anti-Masonic Party, we started a Grand Lodge again. And how that Grand Lodge, which exists now, in 1840 when it got started, there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes and how our Grand Lodge got started. Some of it is a little bit checkered, and I wish to explore that in good taste and with respect. I wish to share that story. But yes, a lot of brethren, unfortunately, don't know what this is about. On the surface level, they read a ritual, and that's it. But they don't digest really what they're learning. I know coming up into this, the catechism, memorizing ritual, these things expanded my mind. They made me think better. They made me more conscientious of what I'm doing. Also, some of the catechism sticks with me. Little lessons that you contemplate. It could be in the day, or it could be when you're out and about. The little lessons remain, and these lessons are deeper than what they appear at the surface. There's little hints of mystical things, and I wish to digest it, and I wish to bring the light out there for other Masons to explore on their own. They give us the working tools, but they don't tell us how to use them. We have to learn for ourselves how to take the tools that Freemasonry gives us and how to apply it to our lives, how to build ourselves spiritually, how to build a better world around us, not by making buildings or being an actual stonemason, but how to build better relationships with people, how to build a better community for yourself and others. So modern working tools, we really want to teach brethren and get them acclimated to modern working tools, the tools we have now. There's still a lot of brethren who don't know how to use a cell phone. They don't know how to use the email or the computers. We want to also, potentially put together like a workshop where we could have brethren come in and we could teach them how to set up a website for their lodge or a Facebook page. We really want to help the older brethren. But yeah, a fantastic backstory. Your career is very illustrious, and it is an honor to have you. And I know we were trying to set this up for some time, but Freemasonry doesn't always work as quick as you want it. There's people you have to get involved, and there's a chain of command, and there's time, and so I'm just really honored to finally be able to facilitate this interview with you, and it's an honor. Thank you so much, bro.
Oh, no, I'm pleased to be here. You mentioned one thing, and this is something that I realized halfway through my research, well, at the beginning of my research, is that Freemasonry, current Freemasonry, was very different from the Freemasonry in the 1770s. Their objectives were different. And I think there was a change sometime around 1820, perhaps 1830, where we focused more on morality, and lodges in England particularly all started to wear black. There's a famous image called the Pulsar Plate, and it shows a lodge in 1813, and it's at somebody's home, a rich person's home, but nobody's wearing black. And they're not wearing aprons with decorations. All the aprons they've got round corners, and they're all completely white. There are no square corners. So where did the triangle and the square come from? So this is a later introduction. And so the early Freemasonry is what I'm interested in, what their objectives were. Why, as you mentioned earlier about the gentry, why did three gentlemen really care about what stonemasons were doing? These are blue collar laborers. Why would they get themselves involved in one of their organizations and say, oh, come on, let's reorganize and we'll help you. You can have quarterly meetings. We'll set up a grand lodge for you. What the hell? The guy's working at the Royal Societies, meeting dukes and noblemen every day, and he decides to spend his evenings with laborers? No, there's something else beside that. Gould wrote an interesting book. It's called I think the correct title is The Four First Lodges, or The Four Original Lodges. And in it, he gives a list of the people who were meeting at, I should open my own book and read it, but my, my, my brain cells are not so active this morning. Gould gives a list of the people who were meeting at the Horn Lodge in 1724, and they get there in the evening and meet for an early lodge meeting. And we have dukes, princes, members of the Scottish, like he's a vice admiral from Scotland, the officer of state for England. We have the king's physician. These are really highly elite people in English and Scottish society. What were they talking about in a room above a pub? They were not talking about morality. They were moral people. They believed themselves to be moral. They would not turn up to listen to a conversation about morality. They would have been offended. You're going to teach me morals? I'm Secretary of State, So that story doesn't, there had to be something really interesting. And alchemy was, I think, is what it was. I think they were still interested in alchemy. And I think that what actually happened was the introduction of spiritual alchemy. And the difference between operative, I don't know if the word is operative, operative alchemy to spiritual alchemy, in England we say it's chalk and cheese, is completely different. And that would have been interesting to these people at that time. Yes. And I think that was what motivated the first three Grand Masters. I think they adopted, or actually may have even done a takeover bid of the operative Masons to use their structure and to educate people through the lodges. The Rosicrucians, I believe, also did something similar in the 1600s, because we read from poems and literature in Scotland that people knew about Masonry, operative Masonry, but they also connected it with Rosicrucianism.
Yes, that's
and
correct.
So operative Masonry and Rosicrucian, to me, seem to be totally different things. But in those days, the Rosicrucians may have tried to use the operative Masons organization to spread their word, because you tell one lodge and then it just all the other lodges, they get to hear about it. And I think the similar thing happened at the beginning in 1716, 1717, with the first three Grand Masters learning from Newton about alchemy and having a new teaching to tell people about. And they thought, let's use the metaphor of building churches and King Solomon's temple with operative Masonry structure and build something new. And I think that was the motivator.
Now, I don't know if there's a historical connection because, in the United States, Scottish Rite is, split into two jurisdictions, northern and southern. When you research, the degrees in the southern jurisdiction and you research them in the northern jurisdiction, you see different beginnings of how these rituals ended up, how they got, revised. I did a little research into it, and you know how Freemasonry, technically downplays some of these elements, but I've seen the 18th degree. There does seem to be some underlying Rosicrucian elements, more or less. Also a little bit of Martinism as well. But when you look into the history of where these degrees come from, they might say otherwise. But having been through those degrees, I could tell you that there does seem to be some resemblance into the teachings of Frater RC or the teachings of Martinism. You do see similar underlying themes. I don't know how you interpret it, but I interpreted that as well because I'm familiar with Rosicrucianism, Martinism, and I did see a similar aesthetic.
So in my fourth book, which came out about 4 months ago, it's called Freemasonry, I don't know if that works out, Royal Arch. And the theme of this is whether Royal Arch is actually the fourth degree, the end of Freemasonry. First three degrees, Then you have, actually, this is the 7th degree because you have the most excellent master, past master, and perfect master, I believe. And then you have the Royal Arch. So this was to do with this, but I also looked at Scottish Rite and other implications, because Royal Arch degree is in Blue Masonry as a chapter. So most, in England, most lodges have to have a chapter
Right.
as well. And in the chapter, they confer the Royal Arch. In Japan, the lodges here don't do that. But so this is, and it says on the Grand Lodge of England's, United Grand Lodge of England's webpage, that Freemasonry consists of 3 degrees: entered, apprenticed, fellow craft, and master mason, and the Supreme Order of the Holy Royal Arch. That's 4, so but it says only consists of 3, So the wording there, I analyzed that in here as well. But there's a reason for that as well. But the thing about the Royal Arch is that it's actually a very religious, it's very different from the first 3 degrees. First 3 degrees, we wear our normal clothes, just dark suits or whatever, and we have no props. But you come into Royal Arch and we have to wear gowns and turbans and whatever, and you have all these props. It suddenly becomes theatre, which the first 3 degrees are not theatre. They're all in the mind. It's what the mind is seeing and listening and envisioning what's happening here. It's very different, the Royal Arch. And the reason is it came from the ancient Grand Lodge, not the modern Grand Lodge. And it's part of a compromise in 1813 when the 2 lodges joined. You have to accept our Royal Arch degree. The origins of this, I think, are Irish. Ireland was Catholic, so this has a very kind of religious overtone, whereas the first 3 degrees do not.
I'm not
The second point is the Royal Arch is the first degree, or nearly the first degree, in both York Rite and Scottish Rite. So why is this like the linchpin of Freemasonry? It's the kind of the end of the Blue Lodge education is Royal Arch, and it's the beginning of York Rite and Scottish Rite. So you have 3 different ways of showing Royal Arch. The 3, if you go to, well, I'm a member of York Rite, of course, Scottish Rite, and the way they do it is different. It's basically similar, but it's different. The words are different. Even the sacred word is different. So what's going on here?
Version. Yes, I did go through those degrees. They were amazing. Different states, different jurisdictions handle the Royal Arch degrees differently. Like for instance, in Virginia, it's more of like a concordance degree. It could be done after the 3rd degree, if I'm not mistaken. You have the option. Now here we do have separate bodies for it. We have council as well, and then we have Knight Templar. Now, when I went through these degrees, I don't want to say ecclesiastical, but there is an element of like theurgy, a spiritual element to it. They do use certain references from the Bible to sort of acclimate you to something greater spiritually. You're actually building your spiritual temple. So like as you refer to the alchemy.
Well, yes, but the lectures in the first 3 degrees all come from the Bible.
Yeah.
And so what's the difference? I think brings in another point, because in the early days of Freemasonry, the government was quite suspicious of Freemasons. And because, particularly in the latter part of 1700, so 1780, 1789, the French Revolution, they believed that Freemasons were behind the French Revolution. The reason for this is because some obscure French cleric had written in a book that the Freemasons were revolutionaries, and they were part of the French Revolution. It's not true, but that's what he wrote. But that got transferred to England, and suddenly the authorities got very scared, because there had been going for about 150 years a war between the Catholics and the Protestants. England was a Protestant country. It had its own church, the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. And we were surrounded in the north by Catholics, in the west by Irish, in the south by France and Spain. And one time the Netherlands was Spanish as well, the Spanish Netherlands. So we were surrounded by Catholics. And so it was always a tenuous situation. The king's, the monarchy was scared that sometime there was going to be an invasion by Catholics. And so when they heard that there were secret organizations that brought down the French monarchy, the French Revolution brought down the monarchy, they were shaking in their boots that the same thing would happen in England. So therefore, William Pitt the Younger started brought in new laws banning secret organizations. There were actually two laws. Um, the first law was making secret organizations illegal. The second one was any organization that places the person under an oath that is not required by law. So, but luckily, because by that time we now had royal grandmasters. So after King George IV, all our grandmasters have been royalty. And so there were people in the government who were very well connected. They took Pitt aside and said, we understand your concerns, but we need an exception for Freemasonry. And the exception was that you had to, he said, okay, I will allow the exception on the proviso that you register every person who comes to your meetings, and you give that book, the register, to the clerk of the peace every quarter or every 6 months for his record. So he knows who was at the meetings. And that's why we sign the register before a meeting every day, because of those laws brought in by William Pitt the Younger and this Catholic Protestant challenge in England.
A lot of definite history. The history of and it is, you know, there is some controversy. You know, other Freemasons aren't as inclined to believe, you know, these elements of, you know, alchemy. There is sort of like a counter movement in Freemasonry where people are just, you know, all about, you know, the ritual. They don't really dig deeper into the deeper meanings. But you are definitely someone who has. And, you know, from your experience, would you say that this is, you know, indefinitely the case, that, you know, there's a lot of alchemy involved in the early days of Freemasonry?
Yes, so I think there are three types of, we now have three types of Freemasons. One is the person who joins and it likes the fraternity. They like doing the charitable work. They like the banquets. They like going to the pub afterwards, but they don't really worry about the ritual very much. They don't want to be asked to give a lecture because they don't want to learn anything. Then there's the second person who's quite serious. He knows the lectures very well. He's very strict about, you know, the how we dress and how we address each other, and he's the kind of purist. And then there's a third element, and I think I represent those third element, the people that believe that we can learn more from Freemasonry than just a lecture on morality. And even, yes, so I think that it's really deep. I think these people in the 1700s, they had classical educations, they knew about the occult, they knew about alchemy, they knew this is what they talked about all the time, and they wanted to preserve these teachings uh, in a very interesting format. And the format is, firstly, it's a play in the round, like the Globe Theatre in England, which is unusual. Most people, you face the audience, but in the round, you actually seem to be part of the audience because you're so close to them. You know, there's no barrier. There's no 6 foot,
Very
six
intimate.
foot between the stage and you know. So I think that's one. So what they, and then if I can step back a bit, before I started writing about spiritual Freemasonry, I wrote a book about the Tarot of the Revelation, based on the Book of the Revelation. And I found that the Book of Revelation had been written in a type of code.
Mm.
In America, in the turn of the century, 1900s, there was a famous psychic called Edgar Cayce,
I'm familiar with him.
Cayce. He died in, I think, 1945. He wrote a book called The Commentary on the Book of Revelation. And when I read that, I studied actually at Cayce's University in Virginia Beach. I did my master's at his university. Um, but when you read Cayce's commentary on the Book of Revelation, first thing I noticed, it was very much like the story of the tarot. And then I compared the two together and I found that many of the tarot cards came from the Book of Revelation. The first 14 are all in the same order given in the Book of Revelation. And this was mind blowing to me. I mean, nobody else had talked about this. So what Casey showed was that the Book of Revelation is actually two stories. There's the one in the Bible, and there's the one underneath for people who understand the symbolism. So the symbolism is like the Whore of Babylon is one of the symbols in the Book of Revelation. What is the Whore of Babylon? So once you understand the symbolism, another story appears. And Freemasonry is the same. There's the surface story that everybody learns. However, there's a story underneath this story, and the symbolisms are like keys that open this story. And the first key is Eureka, because it wasn't written by, it wasn't said by Pythagoras, it was said by Archimedes. And once you realize it's a key that opens more occult teachings, then the story starts to unravel, and that's what happened. And it ended up as being 4 books.
Since we're on the topic of the Tarot, Brother Arthur Edward Waite, he's forever going to be known as a very prolific writer in Freemasonry. What are your thoughts on his interpretation of the Tarot with Pamela? How they created, the almost like the commercial version, the standard version of the Tarot. Would you feel that his interpretation was, on point with your research?
But yes, they made the standard. And I think it's a great thing they did, because they brought it before the public eye, made it accessible. Before that, it was very, how should I say, esoteric, yes, but a kind of game for the aristocracy. And they had these very expensive cards, and there weren't many printed. They weren't available in England. And when they Pamela Coleman, Pamela Coleman, yes, when she redrew these paintings, suddenly they were more accessible, and they've become the standard. However, I believe there are several mistakes in her interpretation, and that's what my book's all about, the Tarot of the Revelation. And it kind of introduces a more spiritual way of using tarot cards rather than divination. So I'm also a tarot master. I took the exams both in America and in England to be qualified, because I didn't have the confidence to sit down in front of somebody and actually charge them money until I had a solid background. And so I was now able to interpret the cards. And there's again, the cards can be used for a spiritual education for both the reader and for the querent person asking for the reading.
Now, I am a member of a Tarot and Kabbalah study group, Builders of the Adytum. I don't know if you're familiar with Paul Foster Case, but I'm really intrigued by, Brother Paul's interpretation of the Tarot, how you could color it yourself and how you're transferring your own spiritual energy onto the card to have a deeper connection. I really like his deck, and I really like his interpretations. Brother Paul Foster Case, if you don't know, he was a Freemason that was also a mystic, and this person is definitely inspiring. I would definitely have to do a profile on Waite and Paul Foster Case. I really like his tarot deck.
No, I agree. But these people are all Victorians. And so before the Victorians were the Georgians, and this is the time of Freemasons. So the Freemasons were basically the people who laid the path for the Victorians to come along and build upon it. And tarot is one of the tools that they built. So to go back to our three different types of Freemasons, I found that the purists are the people who are probably a little bit upset by my writing. One of them, for example, who's a Grand Lodge officer, and he writes reviews for the magazine, and he reviewed the first three books. He was very enthusiastic, but when he read the last one, Royal Arch, he never replied to my emails. He stopped talking because I I don't know. It's perhaps it's a little bit too spiritual for him, and so well that'll happen, you know. But I'm appealing to the people who see Freemasonry as a spiritual journey, rather than people who think of it as a moral education.
But here's the breaking point here, or the tipping point is ritual without context can be very bad. Because if you're going through, you could have an excellent ritual performed, and as a candidate going through the degrees, if you have questions pertaining to the ritual, like, hey, I don't understand this, can you elaborate more? What was that about? Can you explain that? And when a brother who isn't informed on these topics says, oh, I don't know, there's a problem there, because that brother, he might not come back. He might look elsewhere for the spiritual answers that they might need. They might join another organization. They might, so we need to have good ritual as the base, as the foundation, but also context. We need to explain to candidates why they're doing what they're doing, why they're taking a part in this ritual, and some of the deeper meanings do need to be elaborated. And that's why, we here at Modern Working Tools, Brother David, there's a lot of podcasts on Freemasonry, a lot of video channels and things like that. And we're all kind of doing great work. And I'm really proud of what you are doing, Brother David. There's so many good things going on right now. And we are using modern working tools right now. Whether brothers want to admit it or not, this is the future. I mean, you're all the way in Japan right now. We're here taping live in Barrington, Illinois. This would have never been possible in ancient times. This is the convergence of spiritual Freemasonry and also a technological society coming together. And we need to learn how to be acclimated to use these modern working tools.
Yeah, yes, I believe this is a great opportunity for Freemasonry. And so this corona crisis has actually may have stimulated Freemasonry, because a lot of lodges are closing down, just particularly in the West, America and Europe. But in the East, where I am, we're having a little bit of a boom, people applying to become Masons. And we've been opening lodges in Japan, which is unusual. So just talking about the candidate, one of the things I wonder if I'm looking at reading into things that I see, things that weren't intended. For example, the candidate in the first degree only speaks twice. First time he says God. The second time he says light. That's at the altar. And that is actually from the book of John. The Gospel of John says God is light. Now, is that a coincidence, or is that, the intention of the first three grandmasters? I don't know. I like to think that's what they were intended, God is light. But unless you think about it, you wouldn't see that connection, And so sometimes I worry about, if I'm fantasizing, or if this is actually the real.
And I don't want to get into too much details because this is not a tiled setting, but
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
our ritual does mention things like ancient deity, fidelity. We also discuss, the acacia, and in the third degree, something about the energies of our mind. I do wish to get another topic and another show is get into the deeper meanings of our ritual here in Illinois. We do have a standard workbook which contains our ritual. It's not in cipher. It's not really coded. Maybe some words here and there, but for the most part, it is available for brethren to read. I would like to go through and dissect certain passages of our ritual and kind of explain, what that could mean. So yeah, I would definitely love to have you back on for other talks. I know you have a lot of lectures and things. You're definitely a wealth of knowledge, in my opinion. So I would definitely love to have you come back and elaborate more on some other aspects of Freemasonry, if that's okay with you.
Yes, certainly. I have 3 lectures written for each of the books. I'm particularly interested in what I call the Chinese connection to Freemasonry.
Same here. Same here.
And this is something I think is nobody else has written about. So I think it's a kind of unique story. But the correspondence between Chinese philosophy and Freemasonry is just so tight. I just don't see how else to explain it, really. That I the thing is, people forget that from 1660, the East India Company was actually the British East India Company, because there were actually 7 companies called with the same name, but you had like the Dutch East India Company, but this is the English East India Company. They started importing tea from China, and tea became a boom in England. And after that, silk. We used to get silk from Venice. It came along the Silk Road to Venice, and then we imported it. But now it's coming in ships directly. And for the tea, we needed teacups, and they made them in China, special teacups. Before that, we used pottery. We didn't have China, what we call kaolin, this very fine, translucent china. It wasn't available. It was all pottery in the old days, mugs. So with that then became a whole boom in things Chinese. So around the time of the 1700s, and of course these booms was these kind of vogue, I forget my English. They were introduced by the aristocracy because they had the money, and they were always wanted to be at the forefront of culture. And so they started to introduce Chinese style gardens, and then Chinese style housing. And that's my side. Sorry, it's the doorbell. And then the Jesuits are bringing in Chinese literature that they translated into from Chinese to Latin. So people were studying Confucius and Mencius and Lao Tzu, the I Ching, for example. They were studying these at the time of the beginning of Freemasonry, 1717. And it went on until about 1813 or 1814. And then you had the 1830. And then you had the Opium Wars, and then trade with China suddenly stopped. The emperor would no longer allow it.
When I did a little bit of my own research into the topic, I did find out about an ancient deity, Fuxi and Nuwa, who have the square and
Yeah,
compass in their
yeah.
hand. It's almost like a union of divine feminine, divine masculine. There's almost an alchemical underline. There's an alchemical story there. Also, the book of.
If I could stop you just there. So I looked into Fuxi and Nuwa as well, and it's actually a misunderstanding of what they're holding in their hands. The Fuxi is holding what looks like a compass, but it's actually a pair of scissors. Chinese scissors are shaped differently from European ones. They don't have handles. They just have it's like cropping shears. I don't know if you've seen cropping shears. It's just a spring
It almost
bent
looks like
over on itself.
tongs. It almost looks
Yeah, like tongs. Yeah, exactly. That's
okay.
what he's holding there.
Okay.
And Nuwa is holding what looks like a square, but it's actually some thread on a square to hold. There's a little ball in the middle. That's the thread. It's the story of Atropos, the Roman goddess who cuts the thread of life. She's holding the thread, he cuts it. So it's basically they are the gods of life, and every person, their thread is either long or short, and these are the gods that determine it. So they're not actually square and compasses. They look like it, but you need to know a little bit about Chinese history to see that.
Well, thank you for clarifying. That does actually make sense. Now, you do hear the square and compass talked about in Confucius. He does mention
Yeah.
it. The sort of how we should be on the level, how we should respect
Again,
others.
yeah, again, that was taken from Mencius, and Mencius said that a ruler should use all his skills in the same way as a carpenter uses his tools, and so his benevolence and his wisdom should be tools to be used by the emperor for the benefit of people, the same way as a carpenter uses a square and compass. So
Now,
again, it's a little bit of a mistranslation through the years. But there is an interesting story about a person called Da Yu. There was a flood in China along the Yangtze, which is in the south of China. Shanghai is at the beginning of this river. It's an enormous river. It's probably one of the longest in the world. And there had been a flood, went on for several years. And this court official called Da Yu was sent to do something about it. And he used squares, compasses, and a string, measuring string, basically, like, 3 yards. It's got a knot every 1 meter in, so they can measure things. He used it to rebuild the river banks, drain the lands, etc. And he was seen to be a model of let's see, I don't know the exact word, of the model Chinese citizen, because even though he was a courtier, he wore rags, dirty clothes. He got into the work with all the men, and he was helping them, so he wasn't sitting on his horse and telling people what to do. He got involved. And so he's been seen as a China, rather like a precursor for the Communist Party, that everybody's working to bring the country forward. Yes. And he used square and compasses, and that was taken by Mencius as a symbol and used in his philosophy, and that's how it came to Europe.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
complicated.
Do you think that there is a connection between the Chinese fraternal societies, even though they're more malevolent and not benevolent like us? Do you believe that there is a sort of structure and hierarchy that's similar to Freemasonry? Because I did notice that there's catechisms, there's obligations, there's hierarchy and rank of lodge officers and things like that. Can you explain a
I
little
looked into this carefully because, at London University, I studied Japanese and Chinese, including history and philosophy. And so this is an area that really interested me. So these are called the Tian Di Hui, which are the heaven and earth societies. And the heaven and earth societies were peasants who were trying to resist the emperor. This is just after the fall of the Ming dynasty. The Ming dynasty was a very enlightened dynasty where they looked after the population. There was no hunger. Everyone was well fed. They tried to educate people. They focused on the arts and sciences. They were overthrown by the Qing embassy, which came from the north of China, who were basically Mongolians, yes, Mongols, and Manchus. Yeah, early in the morning, they were Manchurians, because that's where we get the expression Manchurian at the gate. There's a book published about the takeover of J.R. Nabisco, and the book's called Barbarians at the Gate. And basically, it was the Manchurians who came up to the Great Wall of China. They couldn't get over the Great Wall of China because it's just so impenetrable. But they convinced the guard at the gate to let them in because there was a rebellion inside Beijing. And so the Manchurians came in to help put down the rebellion, but they decided to stay. They didn't go, and they actually overthrew the whole of the Ming dynasty. They brought in some draconian rules, and they started to steal land from the peasants, and the peasants set up these Tiandihui, heaven and earth societies, to resist the overlords. It's like what's happening in Hong Kong at the present time in relation to mainland China. And they weren't malevolent societies, they were self-help societies. They were an organization to help the brotherhood. So they called themselves brothers. And as you said, they set up lodges. The lodges, called loyalty houses, were run by three brothers who were also called sometimes master. And there were initiation ceremonies. They had to swear a an oath of fealty to the organization. I've in my book Initiation by Light, I've got the English translation of those oaths, and they're very, very similar to what Freemasons their oaths and obligations at the present time. So I don't think the Freemasons let's see. I don't think the Tiandihui was based on Freemasonry. I think it's the other way around. The Freemasons took these ideas from the Chinese. The Chinese the setup of Tiandihui started sometime in the about 1640, 1650. So it's 100, no, it's not 100, 80 years before Freemasonry was re-established as speculative Freemasonry. The operative Freemasons had no, there was no connection in the ritual. They had none of these Chinese ideas in Freemasonry. It's only after 1770 that all these Chinese ideas, we can see them in the lodge. And these Chinese society, Tiandihui, which is also into heaven and earth, one of the degrees in Scottish Rite uses the same identity signs that the Tiandihui use. So they had all these secret signs because people walking along the road, they didn't know if the person was friend or foe, if he was going to get robbed or was going to help him, or they could just pass by. So when they passed somebody on the road, they would hold up three fingers. That was a sign of being in the Tiandihui. And the Tiandihui is actually an overall kind of organized name for the organization, because they had their own groups called like the Small Knives Society, the Three Dot Society, the Hong Society, and three was the three masters. That now is known as the triads, and that's the word triad is three, yes. And so since 1660, 1640, it's continued, and now they are seen negatively as gangsters, drug peddlers, and whatever.
Right.
But even now, they are changing into international organizations, and they have corporate status worldwide. So they've come full circle. But one of the signs used for heaven and earth, and it's easy to remember because in Scottish Rite, one of the signs of recognition is to hold your thumb up. That recognizes that's heaven. And the other person will put his finger down pointing at earth. Heaven and earth, they're recognizing each other, heaven and earth. I mean, that to me is, where did Scottish Rite get that idea from? That's not original. That came from China. So
Yes,
it's just another of those things.
Even the Japanese talk about like hand yoga, where they have certain finger positions to channel one's energy as well. So there's different signs as well with martial arts. I did find a connection with the kata and the catechism. One is just a verbal version, and one is more of a physical and verbal. So there's definitely a interwoven connection, even though it's not always visible. You do have to dig deeper into it, but there is sort of a connection there, and it is interesting to explore that for sure.
The hands things actually come from India. They are Buddhist, and Japanese are Buddhist as well. So they introduce these Buddhist ideas of holding your hand in certain ways, to channel energies. Yeah, that's where it comes from.
It's very alchemical as well, and
well, spiritual, yes. So the idea of spiritual Freemasonry and spiritual alchemy comes from the Chinese. There are a couple of books. One of them is called The Golden Flower. And if you understand the secret of the golden flower, it's actually the same as the third degree in Freemasonry. And that's what I wrote about in my book, Royal Arch, Freemason Royal Arch. And that upset a couple of people, thinking that the third degree was a visual way of understanding this spiritual practice in an ancient Chinese book was too much for some people. Yes. Never mind. Never mind.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap this up here. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but again, thank you for clarifying some information for me. I'm just a student who wants to share light, and that's why
We're all students.
yes,
We're all students.
but that's why I get the experts in like yourself, because I do want to learn as well. I'm learning
That's
with
great.
viewers as well as.
Well, you're the future of Freemasonry, the young guys. You see, I'm the old fart, and so I got to try and get the young guys stimulated to think there's more to Freemasonry than just morality. Lectures on morality is more than that.
Now, I do plan on purchasing the rest of your titles. The best way to do that is by Amazon, right? Or is there
Yeah,
another?
they're all on Amazon. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. You can also see, if you go to YouTube and type in spiritual Freemasonry, I have about 60 videos on there which explain quite a lot of the book. They're all taken from, I make the books into short sections, like 1 or 2 pages, so you can read at lunch and then pick it up next lunch, or it's not a heavy chapter. It's easy to read through, put down, pick up again, and the videos are each of these sections. And so I'm planning to do, I like to make my videos in the lodge because that's kind of appropriate, but because of Corona, the lodge has been closed for a year, the Grand Lodge, so we're stuck. But I'd invite people to go to Spiritual Freemasonry and check it out. I have also a podcast on anchor.fm. We've got a Spiritual Freemasonry there, and I'm blogging, I'm writing a new book, and I have a life to live as well.
What is your website too? I know you have a website as well.
Yes, I normally just under my own name, chris-earnshaw.com.
Okay.
I can't wait to have Brother Chris back on the show. Again, Brother Chris, thank you so much. It is a pleasure. I really appreciate your time, and we're definitely going to conclude this here. Thank you so much.
I'd like to sign off by saying I wish the best to all the brethren, worshipful brethren all at Lodge Barrington 522 under the Grand Lodge of Illinois.
Likewise, please send my regards to your lodge as well. Thank you so much for watching Modern Working Tools. I am your host, Brother Justice, signing off. Until next time, thank you.